General Electric Theater is an American anthology series hosted by Ronald Reagan that was broadcast on CBS radio and television. The series was sponsored by General Electric's Department of Public Relations, Radio. After an audition show on January 18, 1953, entitled The Token, with Dana Andrews, the radio series, a summer replacement for the Bing Crosby program, debuted on CBS on July 9, 1953, with Ronald Colman in Random Harvest, with such guest stars as Cary Grant, Irene Dunst, Van Johnson, Jane Wyman, William Holden, Alan Young, Dorothy McGuire, John Hodiak, and Blythe, James Mason, Joan Fontaine, and Judy Garland. The series continued until October 1, 1953. Jamie Delville produced and directed the show. Ken Carpenter was the host and announcer. Wilbur Hatch supplied the music. Television. The television version of the program, produced by MCA-TV Review, was broadcast every Sunday evening at 9 p.m. EST, beginning February 1, 1953, and ending May 27, 1962. Each of the estimated 209 television episodes was an adaptation of a novel, short story, play, film, or magazine fiction. An exception was the 1954 episode, Music for Christmas, which featured choral director Fred Waring and his group, the Pennsylvanians, performing Christmas music. On September 26, 1954, Ronald Reagan debuted as the only host of the program. GE added a host to provide continuity in the anthology format. The show's Nielsen ratings improved from number 27 in the 1953-1954 season to number 17 in 1954-1955, followed number 11 in 1955-1956, number 3 in 1956-1957, number 7 in 1957-1958, number 26 in 1958-1959, number 23 in 1959-1960, and number 20 in 1960-1961. The show made the already well-known Reagan, who had appeared in many films as a second lead throughout his career, wealthy, due to his part ownership of the show. After 8 years as host, Reagan estimated he had visited 135 GE research and manufacturing facilities, and met over 250,000 people. During that time, he would also speak at other forums such as Rotary clubs and Muse lodges, presenting views on economic progress that in form and content were often similar to what he said in introductions, segs, and closing comments on the show. As a spokesman for GE, Reagan, who would later be known as the Great Communicator because of his oratorical prowess, often credited these engagements as helping him develop his public speaking abilities. Television guest stars. Among the guest stars on the anthology were Bud Abbott, Nick Adams, Claude Akins, Eddie Albert, Leon Ames, Edward Andrews, Fred Astaire, Phyllis Avery, Parley Bear, Raymond Bailey, Patricia Barry, Ann Baxter, Jack Benny, Whit Bissell, Ray Bolger, Ward Bond, Scott Brady, Neville Brand, Ernest Borgnine, Diane Brewster, Charles Bronson, Sally Brophy, Edgar Buchanan, Michael Burns, Francis X, Bushman, Red Buttons, MacDonald Carey, Jack Carson, Jack Cassidy, George Chandler, Lon Chaney, Jr., Phyllis Coates, Lee J. Cobb, Claudette Colbert, Ronald Coleman, Chuck Connors, Russ Conway, Ellen Corby, Lou Costello, Joseph Cotton, Jerome Cowan, Bob Crane, Joan Crawford, Hume Croneen, Tony Curtis, Bette Davis, Sammy Davis, Jr., James Dean, Richard Denning, Dan Duryea, John Erickson, Richard Eyre, William Fawcett, Frank Ferguson, Nina Fock, Joan Fontaine, Edouard France, Eva Gabor, Zsa Zsa Gabor, Judy Garland, Greer Garson, Anthony George, George Goebel, Billy Gray, Virginia Gray, Kevin Hagen, Alan Hale, Jr., Barbara Hale, Darrell Hickman, Ed Hinton, Dennis Holmes, Skip Homeyer, Ron Howard, Gary Hunley, Kim Hunter, Burl Ives, Victor Jory, Alan Jocelyn, Boris Karloff, Joseph Kearns, Ricky Kellman, Ernie Kovacs, Otto Kruger, Nancy Culp, Alan Ladd, Michael Landon, Joy Lansing, Keith Larson, Charles Lawton, Piper Laurie, Cloris Leachman, Art Linkletter, Myrna Loy, Dayton Lummis, Carol Linley, Dorothy Malone, Flip Mark, Strother Martin, Scott Marlowe, Nora Marlowe, E.G. Marshall, Lee Marvin, Chico Marx, Groucho Marx, Harpo Marx, Raymond Massey, Walter Matthau, Taylor Macduff, Giselle Mackenzie, Fred McMurray, George McCready, Kevin McCarthy, John McIntyre, Eve McVeigh, Patrick McVeigh, Tyler McVeigh, Joyce Meadows, Burgess Meredith, Gary Merrill, Robert Middleton, Vera Miles, Ray Milland, Ewing Mitchell, George Montgomery, Rita Moreno, Reed Morgan, Audie Murphy, Burt Mustine, Leslie Nielsen, Lloyd Nolan, Dan O'Hurley High, J. Pat O'Malley, Barbara Parkins, Neva Patterson, John Payne, Larry Pennell, Suzanne Plachette, Judson Pratt, Vincent Price, Nancy Davis Reagan, Jason Robards, Sr., Ruth Roman, George Sanders, Karen Sharp, Robert F. Simon, Dean Stockwell, Everett Sloan, Stella Stevens, Jimmy Stewart, Olive Sturgis, Hope Summers, Gloria Talbot, Rod Taylor, Phyllis Thaxter, Jean Tierney, Audrey Totter, Harry Towns, Claire Trevor, Leona Tuttle, Gary Vinson, Beverly Washburn, David Wayne, Jesse White, Cornel Wilde, Reese Williams, Natalie Wood, Fay Ray, Will Wright, Ed Wynn, Keenan Wynn. Reagan fired by General Electric. Reagan was fired by General Electric in 1962 in response to his reference to the TVA as one of the problems of big government. Reagan would subsequently reiterate his points in his famous 1964 televised speech for Republican presidential nominee Barry M. Goldwater of Arizona entitled, "A Time for Choosing." One such considered above criticism, sacred as motherhood, is TVA. This program started as a flood control project. The Tennessee Valley was periodically ravaged by destructive floods. The Army engineers set out to solve this problem. They said that it was possible that once in 500 years there could be a total capacity flood that would inundate some 600,000 acres. Well, the engineers fixed that. They made a permanent lake which inundated 1 million acres. This solved the problem of floods, but the annual interest on the TVA debt is 5 times as great as the annual flood damage they sought to correct. Of course, you will point out that TVA gets electric power from the impounded waters, and this is true. But today 85% of TVA's electricity is generated in coal-burning steam plants. Now perhaps you'll charge that I'm overlooking the navigable waterway that was created, providing cheap barge traffic. But the bulk of the freight barged on that waterway is coal being shipped to the TVA steam plants. And the cost of maintaining that channel each year would pay for shipping all of the coal by rail, and there would be money left over. The publicity Reagan gained in part from this speech paved the way for his election as governor of California in 1966, when he unseated the two-term Democrat Edmund G. Pat Brown, Sr. Brown was the father of Reagan's successor, Governor Jerry Brown. Michael Reagan, adopted son of Ronald Reagan and Jane Wyman, contends that Attorney General of the United States Robert F. Kennedy pressured GE to cancel the General Electric Theater, or at least to fire Reagan as the host if the program were to continue. The series was not dropped because of low ratings but political intervention, the younger Reagan still maintains. Michael claimed that Robert Kennedy told GE officials that the company would receive no federal contracts so long as Reagan was host of the series. Michael noted the irony that his father's dismissal propelled Reagan into the political arena, and 18 years afterwards, Reagan would take the oath of office as the oldest person thus far in history to become U.S. president. According to Michael Reagan, Kennedy's directive is another example of the law of unintended consequences. Had Kennedy stayed out of GE contract matters, there would have been no Governor or President Reagan, speculates Michael Reagan. In fact, the primary reason Reagan was fired by General Electric for his comments regarding the TVA was that the TVA was one of General Electric's biggest customers. General Electric was and remains the largest supplier of equipment to the TVA and most other electricity producers in the United States. Don Herbert, a television personality well known as the host of Watch Mr. Wizard, appeared as the General Electric progress reporter, adding a scientific touch to the institutional advertising pitch. The show was produced by Review Studios, whose successor in interest, NBC Universal Television, was co-owned by GE. Following General Electric Theater's cancellation in 1962, the series was replaced in the same time slot by the short-lived GE-sponsored GE True, hosted by Jack Webb. On March 17, 2010, General Electric presented Reagan's widow Nancy Davis Reagan with video copies of 208 episodes of General Electric Theater, to be donated to the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library. On April 20, 2010, a lost, live episode of General Electric Theater, The Dark Hours, was uncovered by NBC writer Wayne Federman, who was working on a television retrospective for the Reagan Centennial celebration. The episode, from December 1954, was noteworthy because it teamed Ronald Reagan with James Dean. Highlights were broadcast on the CBS Evening News, NBC Nightly News, and Good Morning America.